have today. Packaging. Boy, how I love to take things. I can make this work.
So Andy, did you really think that you were packaging that hazardous materials correctly?
Well, I thought there was something wrong when I couldn't fit it in the can. Is there a better way?
Well, actually there is. All of the rules and requirements that outline the requirements for shipping a hazardous material are outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations.
But how would I know what those requirements are?
You wouldn't unless you were properly trained. Now let's go to the classroom and learn how to select the correct packaging for shipping hazardous materials. Packaging is probably one of the most important aspects to the shipping operation when shipping a hazardous material, outside of classification. The packaging is going to be the tangible product that's going to be moving through the transportation system. So a leak or any kind of incident involving the packaging in the transport system is probably going to be the first indication that there's a problem. Now, the regulations outline the responsibilities for packaging in 173.22 of the regulations. Now here are the shipper's responsibilities. Except as otherwise provided in this part, a person may offer a hazardous material for transportation in a packaging or container required by this part only in accordance with the following. The person shall class and describe the hazardous material in accordance with parts 172 and 173 of this subchapter, and the person shall determine that the packaging or container is authorized packaging, including part 173 requirements, and that it has been manufactured, assembled, and marked in accordance with the applicable sections of the regulations. There's a lot that goes behind packaging, so it's going to be extremely important to walk your users or the folks that you're training through these requirements carefully. And one of the first things you'll want to do with your students will be to walk them through important definitions found in 171.8 of the regulations. Packaging terms such as packaging, outer packaging, single packaging, combination packaging, and composite packaging. All of these terms will be extremely important for leading them into authorized packagings in the regulations. Now, outside of the authorized packagings for the regulations also outline a number of exceptions to packaging and specific packaging requirements for certain materials. So, in the applicable parts of Part 173, Subpart A, B, C, D, and E will also have to be referred to and referenced in the regulations and in the training program to ensure your students understand these exceptions and how to apply them properly. In the last segment, we talked about classification. What we didn't do was reference the hazardous materials table, which will be an extremely important element in training the packaging requirements. Now, the hazardous materials table will probably be the most referenced part of the regulations when shipping a hazardous material. Now, in training the hazardous materials table, you're going to want to walk your trainees through Column 7 of the Hazardous Materials Table, which outlines special provisions, only because special provisions could apply to specific packaging requirements. But where you'll most likely be spending a lot of your time are columns 8A, 8B, and 8C. Column 8A of the Hazardous Materials Table outlines exceptions for packaging. Now, if there's a packaging exception available for the material that's being shipped, it'll be outlined and referenced in column 8A. What column 8A communicates is that if there's an exception allowed for the material that's being shipped, there'll be a number referenced in column 8A, and column 8A will refer us to the applicable section of Part 173 in the regulations. For example, if your material has the number 150 referenced in column 8A, that would communicate to the user that they would need to go to Part 173.150 or 150 in the regulations to see if there is an exception allowed for the material that's being shipped. Column 8B of the Hazardous Materials Regulation, found in Part 172.101, will outline the requirements for non-bulk packaging. Now, the number referenced in Column 8B will refer a user back to the applicable section of Part 173. If 202 is referenced in column 8B of the Hazardous Materials table, the user would then need to go back and reference the applicable sections of Part 173, in this case 202, to see what packagings are authorized for the material that's being shipped. Now in this video, we won't be covering the requirements for bulk packaging, but there you would find the requirements in column 8C of the Hazardous Materials table. So if you have a company that you're training and they do ship bulk packaging, it's going to be important for you to understand that you'll need to cover the requirements of that particular column in column 8C. Now at the beginning of this segment, we saw Andy trying to put a small bottle into a metal can. Now he exaggerated this out a bit, but it doesn't go beyond what we typically might see in a packaging operation, where users are trying to utilize a packaging not authorized for transport when shipping certain materials. Now, this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that shippers make. They'll either use a packaging that's not been authorized, or they'll use a packaging out of its specification testing requirements. Or, simply they haven't followed the manufacturer's or distributor's closing instructions, which can also lead to disaster in the transportation chain. Now let's just take a quick look at the manufacturer's and distributor's responsibilities for providing notification to the users of their packaging. You'll find these requirements in Part 178.2, Paragraph C, and here's what it states. Except as specifically provided in, and then they list some sections there, the manufacturer or other person certifying compliance with the requirements of this part and each subsequent distributor of that packaging must notify each person to whom that packaging is transferred of all requirements in this part not met at the time of transfer, and then they go to B, with information specifying the types and dimensions of closures, including gaskets and any other components needed to ensure that the packaging is capable of successfully passing the applicable performance tests. Now again, this is just a small scratch of the surface for what needs to be included here. The manufacturer or subsequent distributor needs to ensure that the user has everything that they need to close that package as it was originally tested. Now let's take a look at an example of a UN specification mark. Now for this part of the exercise, we're going to have to make reference to Part 178.502 and .503 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Now in this mark, you'll see that the mark starts off with a UN enclosed in a circle. This mark is the UN packaging symbol. It's the United Nations symbol that will be applied to UN specification packagings. Now the next part of this mark, you'll see the number 4 and the letter G in association with that UN symbol. Now the letter 4 will indicate that the package is a type of box. It's a box, in essence. Now in addition, the letter G will indicate that the box is a fiberboard type of package. Now again, this is nothing more than a cardboard box that we would typically see in the transportation chain. In the previous segments, we learned that packing groups represented a degree of danger for the material being shipped. And those packing groups were represented by the Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. Here, as part of the UN specification code, we'll see the letters X, Y, and Z represented. If the letter X is represented in the UN specification code, it means that the package can contain materials of packing group 1, 2, or 3. If the letter Y is represented, it means that the package can contain materials of packing groups 2 or 3. And for the letter Z, it means that the package can contain only those that meet packing group 3 requirements. The 3 indicated in this specification code indicates the specific gravity or mass for which the packaging design has been tested. And in this case, this packaging has been tested to 3 kilograms. The letter S indicated in the next part of the specification code communicates that the package is intended to contain solids or inner packagings. The next part of the code communicates the year in which the package has been manufactured. The number 14 indicates that the package was tested in the year 2014. Following this mark, we'll see the letters USA. The USA indicates the state authorizing the allocation. And here the letters USA indicate that the packaging is manufactured and marked in the United States in compliance with the provisions of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Now following the USA mark, we'll see either a mark or a symbol with the name and address of the manufacturer or approval agency certifying compliance with the applicable parts of the hazardous materials regulations. Now, if a symbol is used, it must be registered with the Associate Administrator of the Department of Transportation. Now, we've only covered one example of a UN specification mark, and we can see many variations to this mark out in the transport chain. So it's important, again, to know your class and to know the students that you're training to ensure that you would cover marks applicable to what they are going to be shipping. Another important aspect of teaching UN specification packaging is to communicate the testing requirements that go behind UN specification packagings. Now here you'll need to reference the hazardous materials regulations, and for this exercise we'll have to go to subpart M of the hazardous materials regulations, which outlines testing of non-bulk packagings and packages. Testing of UN packagings is meant to mimic conditions normal to transportation. So here we'll see a lot of those conditions outlined in the testing of UN packaging. One of the first tests we'll see conducted on a UN specification package is what's called a drop test. The drop testing requirements can be found in 178.603 of the hazardous materials regulations. Another test that you'll want to explain to the students are the leak-proofness tests found in 178.604. Just as important, you'll want to explain to them the hydrostatic test pressure requirements found in part 178.605. Now, another condition that would mimic transportation could be a stacking test, and there you'll find the requirements in the hazardous materials regulations in 178.606. The stacking test is meant to mimic packages being stacked upon one another inside of a transport vehicle. Now, lastly, there is another test that's typically involved in UN specification package testing. That test is called the vibration standard, and that can be found in 178.608 of the hazardous materials regulations. Now, we know the number of transport vehicles can shake, rattle, and roll during transportation, and that's what this test is meant to mimic. Now, we've only scratched the surface here in packaging as far as training is concerned. You'll want to familiarize yourself with everything that your students are going to be shipping, how they're shipping it, and the types of modes of transport that they're going to be shipping these packages through. Now let's see if Andy can utilize this information and apply it to his packaging scenario. Andy, I see that you're getting the hang of it now. You're utilizing the manufacturer's closing instructions. You're actually using a package that fits the material that you're shipping. Now, if I was to ask you what this 4 in the UN specification code meant, how would you answer that question?
Is that the type of material the package is made of?
Close, but that 4 actually indicates the type of packaging, and the 4 is representative to a box type package.
So then what does the GV stand for?
Great question, Andy. The G actually indicates the material type of the package. In this case, it would be a fiberboard box. And the V indicates that there's a variation on this package in the way that the package can be assembled. Andy could have selected a number of packages for his shipment, but it's important to note only those authorized by the regulations would have been appropriate. And that's why proper training is important.